Welcome to the Spent the Rent podcast. I am your host, Patty Rose. My guest today is Lane County Commissioner Heather Buch. Heather, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So this is really cool. We met briefly at the Lane County Fair last summer, and you were very warm, and it was great to meet you. I was honored that you even knew who I was, and it got cut short because of the shooting. That was pretty wild. We sitting at the DPLC tent, we had no idea what we were facing, and everyone kind of dispersed really quickly. And fortunately, it wasn't just a small isolated incident, but that was pretty scary. So it's been almost a year, and I just read that they're going to be having clear bags at least. So that's a step in the right direction. That the security was an issue, but we have so much to talk about, and we don't have a ton of time today, about 30 minutes. So you are Lane County Commissioner for District 5, which is a humongous district that covers Blue River, Coburg, Cottage Grove, Cresswell, Dexter, Leeburg, McKenzie Bridge, Oak Ridge, a lot of the rural community, and you're seeking re-election. So I wanted to list off some of your endorsements, some big hitters in the Democratic Party of Oregon: Ron Wyden, Jeff Merkley, Peter DeFazio, Val Hoyle, who's running for Congress. She's currently Labor Secretary, and then a unanimous endorsement from the DPLC, among others. There's a lot of different organizations. So you're obviously getting high regard for the work that you've done. So let's talk about what you've done. You took office in 2019, and some of the big things you had faced, the Holiday Farms fire, because that's right in your region, in the McKenzie Bridge, Blue River area. Yes. That had to have been pretty wild. You're like, okay, here we go. And what was it like when you first took office? What was what did you have an idea of of course you would not know you'd be facing the Holiday Farms fire and COVID.
No.
But what was your initial thought, what it would be like, and what was your biggest challenge early on?
Well, the first year, you're really getting into the heart of all the big issues and the budget for the first time. There's a lot of really good work that happened in 2019. And I was vice chair of the board in my first year, became chair in 2020. And that, of course, is the year in which the pandemic occurred. And then the Holiday Farm fire, mega fire, and Labor Day that same year. So I have to say, either of those challenges alone were pretty significant, but together they were unprecedented for the county to work on. We had 2 emergency operations centers going. I was stationed in the EOC and the incident command post for the Holiday Farm fire, going back and forth and being heavily involved in emergency response. Not to mention, prior to that, we had already had floods and smaller fires from previous years. So emergency response is all East Lane in a nutshell in the last couple of years. There are obviously lots of other big issues and topics that we're tackling that are equally challenging, but I would have to say managing those 2 at the same time was pretty significant and quite humbling, and I'm quite proud of the county's response in both items.
I've talked about it on the show that I have a little bit of a connection to the Blue River McKenzie community. Both of my stepsons went to McKenzie High School when they were living with their dad. And I'll never forget that day, when we found out that the fires had took off, because Malachi, my oldest stepson, was living with us at that time. And he was shaking. He was like, he didn't hyperventilating. He's like, everyone's home's on fire, and that was just, it was wild. The silver lining of something like that, a tragedy like that, is to see what happened when people came together. It was unreal. And people put politics to the side and just were there to help each other. And that was really cool. You even saw I think it was at Springfield High School at that time, the recovery efforts. You even saw BLM and Proud Boys moving stuff together. It was pretty wild. So, on the Board of Commissioners, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but on YouTube, there's a page called Lane County Public Meetings, and anybody can access the meetings that you partake in. And I mean, they're kind of slow moving for a lot of the average people, and it's kind of shocking to me. But I looked, and there's only like 180 subscribers to that YouTube channel, so I just don't know if people knew about it. So I wanted to mention that, at least, that there's ways for people to get involved, at least to be more informed of what's happening in our area.
That's right. We've been mainly on Zoom since the pandemic hit. And so, of course, those have been online, and people can watch or join and do public comment anytime. We are in the midst of some pretty big construction projects there at Harris Hall. So we're trying to accommodate in person again in perhaps a smaller conference room. We'll hear more about that real soon. We're all very anxious to get back in person with the public.
So you would prefer to be in person over the
Oh,
virtual?
yeah.
Yeah.
Anytime, hands down. I think we're all zoomed out.
Yeah.
We've been zoomed out for quite some time.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that can take away the experience of one-on-one conversations with people, or even group conversations in person.
Right.
It's a different dynamic. I am pleased that we are able to ensure that more people can watch too, that weren't able to come in attendance the first time. So we'll be doing hybrid meetings.
Yeah, and that's what I love, because I personally prefer being on, because of how much more you can do, the virtual stuff. And so the access is available to more people by being virtual. So the hybrid stuff is great. And I hope that that's the future. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff. So we mentioned the Holiday Farms fire, and you've probably talked about that ad nauseum. So we're going to move on to some stuff moving forward. And that's an ongoing effort, but
Yes, it will be years in
Absolutely.
recovery.
So, but we have so much to talk about. So let's talk about first rural broadband and what you can tell me about what's happening with that.
There have been concerted efforts over the last few years. It's one of my passions to work on rural broadband, to help my largely rural community leap into the 21st century here and be able to participate on numerous levels with the activity that is actually, it's a basic necessity now in order to live life, regardless of whether you're in the metro or rural area. And so we've been working through a consortium of different internet providers. I was really interested in advocating for the recent transportation infrastructure package that passed, because in there is a large bucket of money for rural broadband, and that eventually will be coming through to the state. And then we all have to, go after the grants that they'll put out with that funding. And so we're trying to position Lane County in a really strong position to be competitive in those grants. And that's happening on a couple different levels. Of course, the county in particular is very interested in that, because we want to find ways in which to get people connected outside the core metro area. And we also know that in order to be competitive, we need to be able to adjoin our regional counties in advocating and submitting packages where it looks really competitive, because we're doing a large area and we're all working together. And so at the Lane Council of Governments, we're also working to add some staff that is what they're solely dedicated to doing, is putting that regional plan together and then placing that plan in front of those grantors that will be issuing that funding. I believe that funding will probably start coming out at least in small segments next year. So we have, not a lot of time to get our ducks in a row. But we have been working on it under a lot of other issues that we just talked about along the way in the last few years. And I'll continue to advocate for getting those dollars down here to Lane County.
And with broadband, you're talking about home internet. Is there anything that could be done for mobile? I mean, that's a lot of people. Obviously, you could be on Wi-Fi on your phone at home. But man, when you go out to the rural communities, for any of us that live in town that have gone camping, and we learn real quick that there's no service,
That's
and
right.
and I don't know if that's something that's done on the state or local level, or if it's done by the companies like Verizon or those companies.
The state is really the one that regulates that for for phone, like the large providers. I've gotten into those conversations mainly because in the aftermath of the Holiday Farm fire, we had no communications and we were trying to get all that back up river as best that we could. And working with those large providers was really not, they weren't listening to us on the local level. And part of the leverage to get them back was our state legislators advocating at the state level to make sure they abide by their contract and get that service in. But I imagine as technology progresses and more opportunities present themselves, we'll be able to integrate that back up in not only the McKinsey region, but outlining areas. But communication is key. If we don't have internet, we don't have phone lines, people aren't moving back upriver. It's just a fact of life. It's just a basic necessity that people need to have. And it's also what's needed for economic base in rural communities. They need to be competitive with people all over the world, because a lot of people are doing this stuff online, selling their goods online, or transmitting payments, for services online, and they need to be able to do that. I'm a huge advocate for pushing that forward.
Absolutely. So your website says that you're an advocate for the Climate Action Plan. I got to be honest, I don't even really know what the Climate Action Plan is. So I was hoping today, briefly, that you could kind of explain to us what it is and why you're strongly supporting it.
Sure. We talked about this early in my first year regarding what can the county do to participate in solutions to reduce greenhouse gases. And that's really where we came together and said, okay, we have a role in this. Every agency, every governmental agency really has a role that they can take. What is that role? Let's put together a group of folks that are volunteers, basically from the community, into an advocacy group and come up with a plan as to what the county can do for our part in reduction of greenhouse gases. So that's it in a nutshell. That has developed in the last few years into first reviewing what kind of greenhouse gases the county produces as an agency. And where that's our base, that's our base number. Okay, we now have that. And what can we do to reduce it? And so we are going to be looking at a plan, a 2.0 version, basically, here in the coming weeks at the board, to look at options as to how we can do more, engage more. What can we get grants for, perhaps, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions here locally? And we know that our climate is changing, and part of it is human caused, and we need to do anything and everything that we can to maintain the best environment possible, so that we don't see mega fires, so that we don't see flooding, and we don't have these natural disasters to the extent that we're experiencing now.
And obviously in a rural Oregon community, and it's broad, like we had talked about, that you cover such a wide range of people. There's people. The communities are different in Cresswell and Cottage Grove and Oak Ridge and McKinsey. They're very different from each other. But as you campaign, and this is your second go at it, what do you tell people that are resistant to any type of green energy changes? That they're just kind of locked in. They're like, what about my timber job? Or what about I don't know exactly the industry that's in your district primarily, but there's a lot of people that are so opposed to any of even having the conversation. So, I mean, the letter next to your name being a D sometimes is enough for them to be like, nope. So what do you tell those people?
Technically, our positions are nonpartisan.
Right.
So when I go out and speak to people, I'm talking to them about basic human needs. And many people, there are differences between rural communities and metro communities. But at the heart of the matter, there's a lot of things that everybody cares about. They all care about their environment in a variety of ways. People have seen the changes in the climate. I don't think people are ignoring that or just saying it's not happening. It's how they go about participating in perhaps reducing greenhouse gases that might be different from various communities. But you'd be surprised at how many people really want to come together and find some solutions. And that's what we as commissioners can help facilitate. Uh, there are people in rural communities and metro communities that both really care about this particular issue. And they can be different political affiliations. And when we come together and we all talk about it together, we have meaningful conversations and push forward actual solutions that people can agree on. And that's part of the process of the climate action plan. It's also very similar when I'm talking about, hey, what do you want me as a commissioner to be working on in these coming years? And across the board, it's pretty similar. Housing affordability, homelessness, public safety, public health. And these are all things that the county has a significant role in. So it's not quite as different as some people think. There are nuances and changes because of distance and less population. But overarching, these big topics are pretty passionate topics for most folks.
Yeah, and I think I sometimes forget that it is that, like, even the mayor is a nonpartisan seat, and so it is something that, you're representing a huge group of people. And I think I always say this on the show. People often think that if you're conservative that you don't care about the earth, and that can't be farther from the truth. You know what I'm saying? Because if you go into these small communities, and like I said, I spent a lot of time up in the McKenzie, there's people of all beliefs, and they agree on one thing. If you're going to come up there, you take your garbage with you. You leave no trace. That's an Oregon tenet. It's something that we take pride in. And so I think that it's just like you had talked about. It's just the way that maybe you go about it. That people look
Right.
at it differently, but they all want the same thing. So that's awesome. So now, your work as a housing advocate. This is something that you're extremely passionate about. What are some ways that you've helped people in the rural area stay in their homes? I know that the Holiday Farms fire is a big part of it, but just beyond that, even if take that out of the equation, what are some ways that you've helped people in Oregon stay in their homes?
Housing and homelessness issues, as I mentioned earlier, are top priorities. So I experienced some unstable housing as a child. So that was permanently seared in my heart and something I'm very passionate on working on. There are a variety of different ways the county can be involved in helping housing affordability through our housing action plan as chair in 2020. That was a passion of mine. It is a really good report on various policy issues that we as a community can come together and look at and implement that will help advance housing affordability across the board. And it's something that I want to see implemented right away. We have been working on it, but with pandemic and fires, it kind of halted a little bit. And so it's really important for me to get that jump started and in our agendas for the rest of the year and into my next term, because there are so many good suggestions in that report that everybody could agree on and we can implement right away. And when it comes to our unsheltered folks, I've been advocating really strongly on having a more regional approach. It has been very common in our community that we have separate agencies working on this issue, and that's really homegrown because of the need over the years. We've had nonprofits, churches, and recently, more often, our governmental agencies taking a really close look and trying to advocate and find money and resources to assist. But we're all working in a lot of silos mainly and competing for the same money in order to solve a very similar issue. So it's really important that we work as a region and a team in order to advance and leverage our experience and our resources for a higher and better use to address the problem. I think that's gaining ground. It's taken some conversations between the county government and the city of Eugene government and working together and building better relationships over the years so that we can more fully implement that. And then what I also want to do is make sure we bring in that business community, because it is really important to them and their business and their staff in order to stay afloat. Not only have they been hit really hard with the pandemic, but they also feel the pains of folks on the streets as well in their everyday life. So there's a lot more community that can come together around this particular issue. And I really want to help convene that and assist that as a larger community conversation.
So, do you see the same time? I mean, obviously in Eugene, homelessness is very apparent. It's there because it's right on city streets. Do you see a lot of homelessness in the rural community, or is it, I mean, what does that look like? I mean,
There is a lot of homeless in rural community as well. Before I became commissioner, when I worked with St. Vincent de Paul, that's all I worked on was really diving into communities, primarily in East Lane County, that were suffering from uninhabitable homes in communities that were blighted with a lot of drug activity, a lot of crime, and health-related issues because of it. And but the when they're in the rural communities, sometimes they are more hidden. They're not necessarily on the local main street. But they're there. They're there, and we know that the population and the community is growing. I was just down in Cottage Grove where they're having a housing town hall, and they had about 200 people in the community come to that town hall because they knew that this was a growing issue. They are now starting to see some of those folks come into town for services and on Main Street, so it's becoming more visible. And they all want to do something about it. They need to do something about it, and they have some really wonderful solutions coming down the pike, and just having these really great community conversations about it. And when I'm up, say in Oak Ridge, there's a lot of low income folks. The problem is all over. It's not just in the metro centers of Eugene and Springfield. It's not only all over our state. It is a national issue.
Right.
We see it poignantly on the West Coast because we live in a wonderful place and people are coming here, and the demand for housing is increasing. The cost of housing is increasing, and that's pushing a lot of people out of affordable living. So what we need to do is find solutions to help them find first a home, because the only real solution to our unsheltered is getting them into a home.
Right.
But a lot of them have, compounding issues. So permanent supportive housing is really a wonderful solution so that they can not only get into housing right away, but they can have those social services at their fingertips right there in the same building in order to assist them to have a successful transition into a permanent housing lifestyle. So we're seeking a lot of resources for that and looking for opportunities through not only the county commission, but also our housing authority known as Homes for Good.
Now,
a lot of people don't know that the Board of County Commissioners is the board also of Homes for Good.
Yeah. So now permanent supportive housing, I've talked about it a little bit on the show. For somebody that doesn't understand what that is, can you kind of explain that a little bit?
Sure. So it's a transition from folks that are living on the street or living in what we would call uninhabitable housing or not traditional housing, and put them into an actual home, most likely an apartment style of varying degrees. And so that would be permanent housing, but it would have supports along with it. namely the social services that will help them be successful. These are services that can help them find a job. They can help them with healthcare. Maybe they're on disability, but they're not getting their disability funding that they should, help them with their IDs. And if they need more psychological care or mental health care, we can plug them into any of those services that they might need in order to maintain that permanent housing and be successful.
And then also using the housing first model, which we've talked about, for people that find themselves to be unsheltered, that let's get them housed and then we'll kind of worry about the next step, because a lot of people are like, well, if they stop doing drugs or whatever it is, and there's some truth that addiction is a big part of it, if not the biggest part of it, but it's like you're not gonna get sober. I've dealt with alcoholism and I'm 6 years sober now, and I can tell you that been very fortunate that I was never homeless because I was working and I was functioning, but it was close. It was very close that it could have all fallen apart. And I had support systems from my family and friends that, I collected on some favors that I had given in the past, basically at times when I was in need. So I was very fortunate that I didn't find myself there, but I have close friends that have been there. And
yeah, it's challenging. And part of that is what we're working on now as a mental health stabilization center. So if folks find themselves in a place where they need some psychological assistance, this would be a building where it could house both youth and adult for up to 30 days, open 24/7, no questions, come on in. We'll have psychological and healthcare people available for them. And this is a place where we can help stop that recidivism of people who are maybe dual diagnosed or have additional issues in order to maintain stability in a permanent supportive housing situation. And this will also assist, when it comes to crime reduction in our community. We all know that public safety is a huge issue. And there are a variety of levels of public safety. At the county level, our public safety is mainly the sheriff's office. And we maintain the jail. And I'm very proud to say that we've been able to add a dozen new sheriff positions since I've been commissioner, and done a lot of investment in upgrading the jail system. In our recent American Rescue Plan funding, we've been able to add $17.5 million to do upgrades in the jail system. So it's more into the 21st century type of style of what we know is really important to not only maintain stability within the jail system, but also really care for the people that are coming in. I'm very proud of the fact that our sheriff culture is that we're really tied together with this same issue. There's housing, homelessness, mental health. We don't need and don't want our jail to be our largest mental health facility, which it is.
yeah.
So this mental health stabilization center is really crucial to not only reducing taxpayer costs associated with really expensive public safety needs, but also a more humane and dignified way to assist people to be more successful in their lives, not only in housing, but be able to get that good job and be able to participate fully in the community again.
Yeah, and in Springfield, I don't know a ton of the details, yet, but we saw the devastation that homelessness can cause yesterday, where we had a structural fire, and it sounds like there's two people that were living inside of an abandoned building. It sounds like that may have started fires. We don't know exactly, but may have started fires to keep warm or whatever. And then that ended up causing the place to collapse. And I think both of them lost their life. So it's from what I'm hearing. I don't know a ton. We'll learn more about that, but that was on like 20th and Main. And so these are the things that, it's just devastating, and I've done my part I'm trying to do my part in raising awareness about some of these issues and talk to people like yourself that are trying to find ways to create some safety nets, at least. And that's really what it comes down to. My take on government is that That's what it is. It's like, do you believe in safety nets, or do you believe that you should be all in this alone, and that you should just always have a backup plan on your own? And sometimes that's just not feasible. So we need those safety nets, and so I
Yes.
appreciate the work that you're doing. You know, this is such a huge election, for not just locally. I mean, the midterms. I found out the date, so it's very important that people understand this. If you haven't registered to vote yet, or if you're not registered for a party, we had already said yours is a nonpartisan seat, but there's some very, very important Democratic races, namely Peter DeFazio's Congress seat. And so if you're not registered yet, or registered as a party, Democrat or Republican or whatnot, you need to do so by April 26th. So that's the deadline. So don't wait till the end. Do that now, and you can go to vote.gov to find out how, and the Oregon Secretary of State's website as well. But vote.gov is a very good resource for that. I wanted to talk briefly about the Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson being nominated, and why representation matters, and what this means to you as a woman, as also, to see, obviously we've had women on the court, but this is the first Black woman, so this is monumental. What were your thoughts watching this nomination, and also, some of the treatment that she went through?
Well, clearly it's a historical nomination. And, the women that elevate to that particular level are role models for lots of other little girls all over the country. It's phenomenal. When I ran, and I was the only woman running. There was no woman on the board. And so representation is critical. It's critical. I'm lucky that I'm able to be privileged enough to represent people in East Lane County. I believe, only the 7th woman ever to have been on the Board of County Commissioners. Of course, now I serve with another woman, and interestingly enough, prior to that, women had only represented rural communities as on the Board of Commissioners. And so it's just it evolves to a point where you're breaking boundaries, you're moving in directions that maybe haven't been considered before. We think of different things. We're different. We all have different ideas about what's important and a passion. I'm also the only person on the board that has a small child, so I do get to see my little one, and it's just a different kind of role model for her, seeing her mom as an elected official. And growing up, seeing that is really, really important to young girls and boys throughout the country.
No, absolutely. And I, researching a little bit about you for this interview, I was reading about your personal story about being raised by a single mother. And I relate to that because I was also raised by a single mother. I called him my every other weekend dad. My dad was great, and I lived with him in high school. But as a child, I lived with my mom in her home and watched her. She was a social worker for senior disabled services. But before that, I watched her graduate from college, and so it was breaking barriers that I witnessed. But I have to say, at that time, I thought I was going to be president. So that just shows you the privilege that I now understand more than ever, because I still thought, with all of those obstacles and all of these things that we faced, that it was possible. I never questioned that I could be. I mean, I know it's ridiculous, but I literally thought that. And so that was my aspiration. So I know how big this is for somebody like you're saying, like your child or the daughter of Ketanji Brown Jackson, watching her do this. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, now I know I can, and I think that's just so huge. I think that it was, oh my gosh, I'm going to run a blank on his name. Senator, one of the senators that was talking about it, and he was talking about his kid and watching it. And he, gosh, I can't remember his name right now. It doesn't matter. But yeah, so I've learned a lot from watching and listening to people's different personal stories about why representation matters. And it's something that this podcast has taught me a ton about that. So I wanted to at least touch on that. And, it's pretty cool to see where you've came from to where you are today, and the experience that you had compared to what your child is having. I'm sure is very different. So Well, Heather Buck, thank you so much for talking to me. There's an election coming up. I think that it's very vital that people keep you in office, and anybody that's interested can go to YouTube and look up. Let me make sure I got the right thing again. It's the Lane County Public Meetings, and they can watch the work that you're doing in the meetings for the Board of Commissioners. And yes, for the average person, it's a little slow, but I think it's really important that we inform ourselves. So thank you so much for doing this, Heather Buck, for re-elect Heather Buck for Lane County Commissioner. We're going to get out of here, so thank you so much. I'm going to end this with a song. I chose this. This is a good friend of mine, Lee Jones of the group Buffalo Romeo. They just put out a new album. It's available on Spotify. I'm going to play a couple of their songs in the next couple weeks. So this is the first one. This is called Unsafe at Any Speed by Buffalo Romeo.
Thank you.
Yeah, Billy and me were outsiders. No, we never did fit in, getting off on the in crowd. Hey, we kept laughing just to kill the pain. We were heads full of questions and dreams, bigger than any school, busting out at the seams all over, yeah. While we kept on playing the fools. Do you remember that night, Billy? Hey, we were sideways in the road, told our folks we were camping. We took your Corvair out to the Colorado, pulled up at the river. We kicked back and partied with all the wandering freaks. I wonder if they were like us. We'll never know, 'cause half of them could not speak. We were unsafe at any speed. And it's a wonder that we survived unsafe at any speed. Oh, we felt weird to be alive unsafe at any speed. Flying in the night, unsafe at any speed, getting high and getting tight. Do you remember the music? Oh, like I remember flying away on the magic and the beauty, laughing, crying, belting out harmony. Last night I had it happen again, Billy. I was with some friends, we were drinking wine. I drifted off in the music, the chill shot down my spine, and I was flying. It's like a gift from God or the universe or something, to feel that one sweet moment of bliss, the perfect chord, sunset or wave, oh, the one you love. And when they finally give you that first real kiss, oh yeah. And it's no wonder that we survived unsafe at any speed. When it feels that fine to be alive unsafe at any speed. Here we go flying into the night unsafe at any speed, getting by on feeling alright. kids today now, Billy. Yeah. Oh, I can't understand what they do. Extremely odd behavior and hair. Yeah, half of them can't tie their shoes. They sit glued to the video screen, eating pizza and talking about virtual reality, TikTok, gender flux, Tinder box, Bitcoin. What the actual fox? It's all Greek to me. But what's the difference between them and us, Billy? In the end, but what the hell do we know? We keep seeking the limits of love and existence as we read